There is a question I want you to ask yourself, not casually, not in passing, but the way an archaeologist digs into the earth searching for a fossil buried deep beneath the surface. The question is this: in an age when human beings possess more than their ancestors ever dared to dream of, why are we less happy? Think about it for a moment. We carry smartphones more powerful than the computers that sent humans to the moon. We have restaurants serving cuisine from every corner of the planet. We have more entertainment content than any person could consume in hundreds of lifetimes. We have platforms that connect us to each other in an instant. And yet, a 2023 report from the World Health Organization declared that depression is now the single leading cause of lost health worldwide, with over 280 million people affected, and the number keeps rising every year. This is not a coincidence, it is a signal. And that signal is telling us we are looking for answers in the wrong place. Psychologists, neurologists, pharmacists, they are building medications, apps, and therapy groups, all of which have genuine value. But all of it is treating the downstream effects. It is like mopping water off the floor while the tap is still running. There was a man who sat beneath a tree in India 2,600 years ago and saw the tap. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. What he discovered on the night of his awakening was not a religion. It was not a set of beliefs. It was a startlingly precise analysis of the mechanics of the human mind. So precise that modern neuroscientists, when they encounter it, find themselves nodding along. Today, we are not going to talk about Buddhism as a religion. We are going to treat it as a map. A map drawn with extraordinary care, designed to guide the mind out of suffering. And once you understand this map, you will never look at modern society the same way again.
Foundation: before the world became what it is. The origin of the problem: 2,600 years ago. Imagine you are a doctor. Every patient who walks through your door presents with the same set of symptoms: exhausted, anxious, a persistent feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in order. Do you treat the symptoms? Or do you ask, what is the true root cause? The Buddha asked the second question. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse on the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dhamma, recorded in the Pali Canon under the Samyutta Nikaya, Mahavada section, he proclaimed the Four Noble Truths, Arya Satya, four realities that, once seen clearly, reframe everything. The very first thing he declared was not a promise of happiness. It was a confirmation of suffering. Idam ko panna bhikkhave, dukkham arya satyam. This, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. The Pali word dukkha is almost always translated as suffering, and that translation is too narrow. The word comes from the prefix du, bad, difficult, and ka, the axle hole of a wheel. The image is vivid and exact, a wheel spinning on a warped axle. It does not stop, it vibrates, it never runs true. Dukkha, then, is not simply pain. It is the fundamental sense of incompleteness baked into the nature of conditioned experience. The feeling that something is always slightly off, that life never quite fits, that even our most joyful moments carry a faint undercurrent of unease. The Buddha laid out three distinct dimensions of dukkha in the Satyavibhanga Sutta. The first is dukkha, the obvious suffering, physical pain, illness, grief, death. The second is viparinama dukkha, the suffering of change, Happiness fades, love shifts, success does not last. What once felt like solid ground turns out to be a sandbar. The third and most subtle is sankhara dukkha, the suffering that is woven into the very fabric of conditioned experience. This is not the suffering of a specific loss or disappointment. It is the ambient, structural dissatisfaction that underlies all constructed experience, the background hum of incompleteness that no achievement can silence. And it is this third dimension that describes modern society most precisely. We are not in acute agony. We simply feel that something is missing, even when we have everything. That is sankhara dukkha running in the background, like an operating system no one installed on purpose.
Wait, have you ever felt this? You finally bought something you had been wanting for months. The first hour was wonderful, but then the thrill faded, and before long you were already thinking about what you wanted next. Neuroscientists call this hedonic adaptation, the brain's tendency to return to a baseline level of satisfaction after any positive stimulus, whether that stimulus is money, status, or a new relationship. The Buddha called it anicca, impermanence, and he taught it 2,600 years ago. Modern society teaches the opposite. It tells us work harder, achieve more, buy better things, become a better version of yourself, and then you will be happy. This is the fracture I am pointing to, a fracture between the actual mechanics of the mind and the story that society repeats to us until we believe it. And in that fracture is exactly where depression lives.
The core, the anatomy of suffering in the digital age. Tanha, the engine of suffering that the modern world has turbocharged. The second noble truth in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta reads, Ayam ho panna bhikkhave, dukkha samudayo, ariya sacham, yayam tanha, pono bhavika. This, monks, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving that leads to renewed existence. Tanha, pronounced tanha, is literally translated as thirst. It shares its root with the Sanskrit word for water, and the image is deliberate. It is the thirst of a person drinking seawater. Every sip intensifies the craving it was supposed to satisfy. The Buddha identified three distinct forms of tanha. Kama tanha is craving for sensory pleasure, delicious food, beautiful images, intoxicating sound, pleasing touch. In the digital age, this craving has been systematically amplified by algorithms engineered to capture and hold attention. Every swipe through a social media feed delivers a small burst of dopamine, frequent, unpredictable, precisely calibrated. Over time, the brain loses its capacity to find satisfaction in anything that doesn't come with a built-in hit of stimulation. Bhava tanha is craving for becoming, for status, identity, success, and recognition. Modern capitalism has built a world in which human worth is measured in job titles, income, follower counts, and output metrics. LinkedIn has become the arena of bhava tanha, where everyone is simultaneously performing who they are and racing toward who they intend to become. Vibhava tanha is the most dangerous of the three, craving for non-existence, the desire to escape, to numb out, to simply not feel anything for a while. In a world where content streams endlessly across every screen, many people turn to alcohol, substances, binge-watching, or gaming, not because they enjoy these things necessarily, but because they desperately need 2 hours of not feeling. Vibhava tanha is the shadow that depression casts. In the early 2000s, neuroscientist Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan demonstrated that the brain's dopamine system is wired for wanting, not for liking. The circuitry drives us to seek, but it offers no guarantee of satisfaction once we arrive. The brain generates the hunger, it does not deliver the meal. What the Buddha discovered through direct, sustained observation of his own mind, modern science confirmed 2.5 millennia later in a laboratory.
Anatta, when identity becomes a prison of your own making. The most unsettling teaching in all of Buddhism is not karma, not rebirth, not the idea of no permanent soul. The most unsettling teaching is anatta, non-self, the teaching that there is no fixed, solid, permanent you. In the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha challenged his first 5 disciples to examine each of the 5 aggregates of experience: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, and find anything within them that could genuinely and permanently be called mine. Yada nityam tang dukkham, yang dukkham tad anatta. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering is not self. Impermanence leads to suffering. Suffering reveals that there is no permanent self to cling to. Modern society is built on the exact opposite premise. It instructs us to build a personal brand, to be authentic, to love ourselves, by which it means, most of the time, to become more deeply attached to the image we have constructed. Social media has turned the self into an ongoing project that requires constant construction and maintenance. Every post is a brick. Every like is mortar added to the wall. Every negative comment is a crack that needs patching before it spreads. The brain region responsible for this self-referential architecture is called the default mode network, the neural circuitry that activates when we are not engaged in any external task, when we are daydreaming, ruminating, thinking about ourselves. Researchers at Harvard have found that an overactive default mode network is strongly associated with depression and anxiety. Put plainly, the more time the mind spends thinking about itself, the more it suffers. And the more that self-concept is built on external foundations, a job title, an achievement, the approval of other people, the more fragile it becomes, because all of those things lie outside our control. When that constructed self collapses, what we call depression is what remains. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Depression, in this framework, is not a character flaw. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal that the self you constructed was built from impermanent material, and the structure was never going to hold. Anicca, why we keep trying to grip what flows through our hands. Picture yourself trying to hold water in your fist. You squeeze tighter, tighter, and the harder you grip, the faster it runs through your fingers. That is precisely what the mind is doing with happiness. Anicca, impermanence, is the first law of the universe, according to the Dhamma. Everything changes. Nothing holds its form. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, these were among the very last words the Buddha spoke before his passing. Vaya dhamma sankhara apamadena sampadetha. All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This is not pessimism. It is the most honest description of reality available. And yet, modern society is constructed almost entirely on the denial of impermanence. The beauty industry sells the hope that you can slow the aging of your body. The financial industry sells the dream that your wealth will compound indefinitely. The culture of romantic love sells the image of a connection that will never fade, never disappoint, never end. Every one of these industries is, at its core, selling willful blindness to anicca. And when impermanence arrives to prove itself, as it always does on its own schedule without asking permission, the pain it brings feels like betrayal. It feels as though the world lied to us. The world never lied. We simply chose not to listen to what it was already telling us.
Phassa and Vedana, when the world stimulates more than the mind can absorb. In the teaching of Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination, the Buddha's map of how experience arises, two links are especially relevant here. Avijja Paccaya Sankhara, with ignorance as condition, mental formations arise. Phassa Paccaya Vedana, with contact as condition, feeling arises. Phassa, contact, is the moment where sensory experience meets the outside world, the instant when eye meets form, ear meets sound, mind meets thought. Vedana is the immediate tonal quality that arises from that contact, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. These are not emotions, they are pre-emotional signals, the mind's first pass evaluation of every experience it encounters. In the era when human beings lived in forests and villages, phassa arose in quantities the nervous system was built to handle. Today, in the digital age, the mind is flooded with phassa thousands, perhaps 10,000s of times each day. Every notification is a contact event. Every advertisement is a contact event. Every autoplay video, every email, every text message.
The mind is designed to evaluate every Vedana and decide, approach, or avoid. But when phassa overwhelms the mind's capacity to process, a state emerges that psychologists call sensory overload. The nervous system, designed for the scale of a forest, not the internet, begins to saturate. When the nervous system is chronically overstimulated, it does what any overloaded system eventually does. It shuts down. The result is what many people describe as a deep inner emptiness, a feeling of not feeling anything at all. This is one of the defining features of clinical depression. The Buddha did not own a smartphone, but he understood this mechanism well enough to teach his students to observe phassa and Vedana without automatically reacting, to be present for the signal without being swept into the response. That is the foundation of vipassana meditation. Avijja. The problem is not a lack of information, but a lack of insight. Many people assume the central problem of modern life is that we don't have enough information. That diagnosis is wrong. The deeper problem is avijja, ignorance, and not the ordinary kind. In Pali, avijja does not mean being uninformed. It means failing to see reality as it actually is. In the teaching of dependent origination, avijja is the first condition in the entire chain of suffering. Avijja paccaya sankhara. With ignorance as condition, mental formations arise. Everything that follows, craving, clinging, becoming, suffering, flows from this single root. Avijja, specifically, is the failure to understand the Four Noble Truths, not seeing the nature of suffering, not seeing its cause, not seeing that liberation is genuinely possible, and not knowing the path that leads there. But here is the paradox. In the information age, we are drowning in content about mental health. We read articles on depression. We watch videos about anxiety and burnout. We work through self-help books by the dozen, and the suffering persists. Because avijja is not a lack of data about suffering. It is the lack of direct seeing, insight that cuts through the filters of craving, fear, and constructed identity without being distorted by them. Confucius once said that learning without reflection is wasted, and reflection without learning is dangerous. But the Buddha went further than even this. He taught that thinking itself is not enough.
that genuine liberation requires a quality of direct perception, dasana, that lies beyond the reach of conceptual analysis and logical argument. It is the difference between reading about water and actually being wet.
Comparison with Western philosophy, when great thinkers came close but did not arrive. Stoicism, which flourished in Greece and Rome some 2,000 years ago, taught a discipline of distinguishing between what lies within our control and what does not. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who wrote the Meditations on military campaigns, argued that it is not events that disturb the mind, but our interpretations of events. This maps onto the Dhamma's understanding of avijja with striking precision. But Stoicism still assumes a stable, rational self that can exercise this control. Its entire architecture rests on the existence of a solid I who can choose its interpretations. In Buddhist terms, it builds its house on the foundation of atta, the fixed self that anatta dissolves. Existentialism, particularly in the work of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, acknowledges that life carries no inherent meaning and that we are condemned to construct meaning ourselves. This resonates powerfully with the Buddhist understanding of dukkha and the absence of any pre-given purpose. But existentialism offers no clear path out. It diagnoses the condition with courage and intellectual honesty, and then largely stops there. Buddhism goes further than either tradition. It diagnoses the illness, identifies the precise cause, demonstrates that recovery is genuinely possible, and provides a detailed course of treatment, one that has been tested and refined by practitioners over the course of 2,600 years. Summary of what we have learned. So, where does this leave us? First, modern society is not depressed because life has gotten worse. It is depressed because the entire system has been constructed on conditions that amplify dukkha, conditions that intensify craving, erode presence, and keep the mind in a perpetual state of reaching. Second, the Buddha identified 5 root conditions that drive this suffering: tanha, craving; anatta, misunderstanding, the fragile constructed self; anicca, resistance, fighting impermanence; phassa, overload, sensory saturation; and avijja, the failure to see clearly. None of these are religious concepts. They are descriptions of the mind's machinery, and modern science is confirming them, one study at a time. Third, modern science treats symptoms, and it does this with genuine skill and value. The Dhamma treats root causes. These two approaches are not in conflict. They operate at different depths of the same problem. The entire teaching distills to a single sentence: a mind that clings to impermanent things will always suffer, regardless of how tightly it holds them. The first steps. Step 1. Begin by observing, not by changing. In the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the Buddha taught sati, mindfulness, and he did not define it as sitting cross-legged on a cushion. He defined it as knowing, clearly and continuously, what is actually happening in this body and this mind in each moment of experience. Start simply. The next time you reach for your phone, pause for 1 second. Ask, what is driving this? Is it kama tanha, a craving for pleasurable stimulation? Is it bhava tanha, a need to feel recognized or relevant? Or is it vibhava tanha, a desire to disappear into distraction and not feel what you're actually feeling? You don't need to put the phone down, just know what you are doing and why. That moment of knowing is where liberation begins. Step 2. Practice seeing impermanence directly. Choose one thing in your life that you are currently clinging to, a relationship, a professional role, a sense of identity built around an achievement. Then think about it honestly. How has it changed over the past 5 years? How is it likely to look 5 years from now? This is not an exercise in pessimism. It is training the mind to recognize what has always been true, so that when change arrives, it does not feel like a betrayal.
Step 3. Deliberately reduce fossa. Choose 1 hour each day with no screens. Morning, commute home, before sleep, whatever fits. Not because your phone is the enemy, but because the mind needs open, unstructured space in order to process its own experience. Soil that is never allowed to rest cannot continue to grow anything. Start wherever feels most natural, but the most important thing is that you start. Tell us in the comments which step you'll try first, and if something has already shifted for you while listening to this, like the show and subscribe to follow the next awakening.
Soul reflection. A coda toward awakening. The final revelation. There is a phenomenon in astrophysics known as the cosmic dark ages. It describes the period after the Big Bang, before the first stars ignited, a span of hundreds of millions of years during which the entire universe was dark. No light, no source, no direction. Only particles drifting through the dark, drawn together by forces they could not perceive. A mind entangled in tanha is a mind in its own cosmic dark ages. It does not know it is waiting for light. But the light is real. It arrived when particles gathered with sufficient density for nuclear fusion to occur, and the first star flared into existence, illuminating a universe that had been dark since its beginning. What the Buddha discovered beneath the Bodhi tree is that the mind has its own ignition point. That point is not achievement. It is not accumulation. It is not becoming anything at all. It is simply seeing directly, without the veil of craving and ignorance filtering the view.
The closing vision. Picture a dying star. In its final hours, it emits the brightest light in its entire history, a last supernova of radiance, before its mass collapses inward and transforms into something entirely new. That is what happens when the constructed self begins, gradually, to loosen its grip. Not annihilation, transformation. A passage from the darkness of the cosmic dark ages into the clarity of the first light. The depression of modern society is not a disease, it is the mind's call to come home. And that home is Nibbana, not a place to journey toward, but a condition that remains when craving finally ceases, like the surface of a lake after the wind has gone still. The final line. The sky is never depressed, even when clouds cover it from horizon to horizon. Your mind is no different. What you call emptiness may be nothing more than clouds obscuring a light that has always been there, waiting patiently for you to stop running and simply turn around to look.